This is a stimulus update and daily news report. Got some good news here. So the House passed a vote to suspend the debt ceiling last night, and the Senate has reached a deal when it comes to averting a government shutdown. I'll give you the latest on those two huge stories. I'll go over this article right here. Stimulus check update. Biden administration announces new $600 payment for some Americans. When it comes to the $3.5 trillion stimulus, today is the day for the infrastructure vote. And if it is not voted alongside the $3.5 trillion stimulus, then progressives will tank that infrastructure vote, causing more problems with the standoff that's going on right now. According to the White House, they believe that Kyrsten Sinema is on board for the reconciliation bill, so Congress must raise the debt limit by October 18th, Treasury Secretary Yellen warns in a new letter as default looms. So October 18th, that's the new deadline. What has happened so far? So late last night, the House votes to lift debt limit until December 22nd, but will face long odds in Senate. So another article right here, House passes debt ceiling suspension that is doomed in the Senate. So before we get to the Senate part, let's talk about what actually happened. So the House on Wednesday passed a bill that would suspend the U.S. debt ceiling. Republicans will reject the legislation in the Senate, as they say they will not support the debt limit increase or suspension. And Democrats are trying to prevent two potential crises this week, a possible government shutdown and first ever U.S. default. So when it comes to this, the U.S. default, the way that the vote worked out, it was a 219 to 212 vote. All Democrats except for Jared Golden and Kurt Schrader voted for it, and then actually one Republican, all Republicans opposed it except for Adam Kinzinger of Illinois. So some shocking turn of events there in terms of votes. Now, this is set to go to the Senate, as I mentioned before, and as the article said, most likely Mitch McConnell and the Republicans are going to vote against it. So this might be one of the last chances before a debt default happens. Now, when it comes to a shutdown, Senate reaches a deal to avoid a government shutdown. The Senate has reached a deal to avoid a government shutdown. Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said late Wednesday the legislation would fund the government into early December and provide money for hurricane relief and Afghan refugee resettlement. Congress has to pass a funding bill before midnight Thursday to avoid a shutdown. That's today, which is a big day. I'm going to try to see if I can get another video out later. Lawmakers will have to separately raise the U.S. debt ceiling before October 18th to prevent first ever default. So what Chuck Schumer said at 9:42 last night, tomorrow the Senate will vote on legislation to prevent a needless shutdown, provide long-sought emergency funding to help Americans still reeling from natural disasters, and provide funding to help resettle Afghan refugees. Now, saying that a deal has been reached, we're going to find out more on what's going on with that, because a deal may have been reached, but it all comes down to the votes of what's going to happen today. So big vote. We have the infrastructure vote as well as the government shutdown vote, which is scheduled for today. Nancy Pelosi saying there's no patience for Democratic debt ceiling holdouts. Here is a video clip explaining what's going on in the latest with all these big situations.
President Biden met with top Democrats Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer tonight. The possible shutdown less of a concern now than the divide among Democrats over the president's economic agenda, expected to get what could be a pivotal vote tomorrow. Tonight, lawmakers racing to prevent a government shutdown. Both chambers needing to vote to extend funding by midnight Thursday.
Democrats don't want to shut down the government. Republicans don't want to shut down the government.
This would be a shutdown of stupidity.
Democrats who control Congress planning a vote in the Senate to avoid a shutdown as soon as tonight, with no opposition expected. Meanwhile, President Biden canceling a planned trip to Chicago to remain in Washington, focusing on breaking an impasse between moderate and progressive Democrats that's threatening to derail his agenda. A Thursday House vote on the trillion-dollar bipartisan infrastructure bill now in jeopardy, with progressives planning to block it without a deal to advance Democrats' $3.5 trillion social and climate policy bill, too. Key moderate Joe Manchin says that bill costs too much and the bipartisan bill should pass first. House progressive Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez pushing back.
96%, myself included, of the Democratic Party is in agreement that we need to pass both bills.
He said he's still negotiating in good faith to get there.
Let's stick to the original plan. I will support Manchin's priorities, he can support my priorities, and we can all win. And working families need child care, health care, climate action, and infrastructure investment.
But Congress' first order of business remains funding the government, making sure that after Friday, federal employees like IRS analyst Crystal Kirkpatrick in Utah will keep drawing a paycheck.
This isn't politics. This is my kids' groceries. This is making sure that everyone in my house is fed and happy and clothed, and you just can't mess with that.
Garrett, there are a lot of pieces in play here. As I mentioned at the top of the broadcast, there's this looming deadline over raising the debt limit, the government's ability to borrow money.
Yeah, that's right, Lester. The deadline for default is October 18th, and right now Republicans are demanding Democrats raise the limit on their own. Democrats say Republicans are just as responsible as they are for running up the debt in the first place. Neither side is budging yet.
So what are your thoughts on what's going on? Is the U.S. doomed? Let me know your thoughts on that down in the comments below. So Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema leave Democrats in lurch as Biden agenda teeters. So moving on to the infrastructure and that big stimulus package, the White House believes Kyrsten Sinema supports passing reconciliation bill this year. We're not so sure about that because take a look at this video clip of Joe Manchin, who is on a similar wavelength as Kyrsten Sinema. We haven't heard this directly from Kyrsten Sinema, this White House quote, but here is a video clip from Joe Manchin.
She said that they need by tomorrow legislative language agreed to. That means
that won't happen. That
won't happen. Why is that?
No, listen, we're not. We haven't been negotiating yet in good faith. No one's been negotiating along those lines with the other party to see what would be acceptable. So all we need to do is pass the bipartisan infrastructure bill, sit down and start negotiating in good faith. That's it.
Senator, progressives feel, though, you're not dealing in good faith. They felt that there was a deal made before.
I never knew about that. Never heard.
So you were never part of a deal that linked the two bills together.
About two of them are going to be together.
Yeah.
Why do you think we worked so hard to separate them?
Is it possible?
No, it's not possible. No, it's not possible.
Not possible to get any framework.
What's possible is sit down and have good frank negotiations.
Joe Manchin does not seem like he is on board yet, and we're coming down to the wire. Let me know your thoughts on what Joe Manchin said. So Bernie Sanders urges House Democrats to vote against infrastructure bill before reconciliation. Basically, today is the day when he's saying, hey, if the infrastructure vote comes up, all Democrats, all progressives, let's not vote for that. Otherwise, the $3.5 trillion package will never happen. Pelosi leaves room to delay the infrastructure votes, but there is a tight margin going on right now. And Pramila Jayapal, who is the Progressive Caucus leader, said, we had a deal. The President's Build Back Better Act and the infrastructure bill go together. A very small group is trying to back out of that deal. That's why we can't pass infrastructure first and risk leaving childcare, healthcare, education, and climate action behind. Also, Bernie Sanders tweeted what 95% of the Democratic caucus wants, and more importantly, what the American people want, is two pieces of legislation on which, yes, will not only build our physical infrastructure, but will finally invest in the long neglected needs of our country's working class. Let's do it. This is what he said at 8:05 p.m. last night. Here is a video clip from AOC talking more about these two big bills and what's going to happen. Take a look at this video clip right here.
Why is there an effort to link them both and make sure that the big bill doesn't get delayed indefinitely after the small bill passes?
Yeah, so I completely agree with you that a lot of this discussion about process and tit for tat just is very difficult to follow and doesn't really cover the heart of this conversation, which is that we have two bills at present, one which underfunds most priorities across the board. So there are very few priorities that even get the full funding that they even need. And then there is the larger, what is known as the budget bill, reconciliation bill. That has the stuff that you're going to feel in your everyday life. Universal pre-K. We're talking about college, community colleges. We're talking about expansion of Medicare. And we're debating including vision and dental in Medicare, conversations about lowering the age of it, robust climate action, renewable energy. All of that stuff that you're going to feel in your everyday life is in what is known as the Build Back Better Act, aka the reconciliation bill. Now, when we were discussing the scope of this bill way earlier in the year, this was the original infrastructure bill. And we have a vast majority of Democrats, about 96%, that are in agreement of the entire agenda. Now, a very small handful of Democrats, about 4% of the party, are trying to essentially split these two priorities up. And I personally don't think it's an accident that the ones that a lot of lobbyists love are in the much smaller, underfunded bill that don't make prescription drugs easier to buy and more affordable, etc. And what they want to do is split them apart, force a vote on the first one. And because we have such narrow margins in the Senate and the House, the read that we have is that they'll just dump the second one, leave the other one out to dry, and just never actually vote on it. And so the way that we bring our two parts of the caucus together is by saying, you know what? My bill is bound up in your bill, and your bill is bound up in my bill. So do I love this very, what I would argue a conservative underfunded bill? No. But I will vote for it if we pursue them both together. But what we should not take is this approach, which is what people are trying to do by forcing a vote tomorrow on an under-considered, under-amended bill by itself, by saying, we want to force this vote right now, and it's either my way or the highway. You don't work together. I want your vote, but I will give you nothing for it. Your community will not benefit from this as much as mine will. We don't have to pursue that route. We can, instead of saying it's either mine or yours, we can say both of us can succeed together. And that is the case that the Progressive Caucus is making. But if we vote for this bill tomorrow, Rachel, and I want to be very clear about this, if we vote for this underfunded, too small infrastructure bill alone, instead of voting for it with the rest of the president's agenda, if we vote for it alone, it could make our climate crisis worse, and it risks being the only or the last substantive piece of legislation that we will pass. I do not believe, we do not have the assurances necessary to believe in good faith that reconciliation will pass if infrastructure passes tomorrow, because it gives that small, narrow margin of Democrats that have, really been making this process quite difficult. There was an overall agreement between the process 2 months ago, and then there was a reneging of that. And so if we can just stick to our original plan, stick to the promises we've made each other, we can proceed in good faith and transform the lives of millions of Americans for the better.
Do you feel optimistic?
I do feel optimistic because the Progressive Caucus, and not just the Progressive Caucus, but we are now seeing a lot more Democrats, even not part of the Progressive Caucus, join and say, you know what? Childcare, healthcare, the climate crisis, this is too important to shelve. It's too important to shelve. And I also want to really thank people at home for supporting House Democrats who do not accept corporate PAC and lobbyist money. And those sorts of Democrats are not just progressive, they're not just conservative, they really transcend a lot of party ideology, but they're a recent phenomenon and that have really been surging since 2016 and 2018. And I really do believe that that is what is changing the dynamic that we're seeing in Washington today, where that stranglehold that lobbyists have traditionally had over Washington, that's still very much do in a lot of sectors, is starting to loosen, because everyday American voters and everyday people at home are starting to support members of Congress and send members to Congress that don't just do what lobbyists tell them to do, but say, we're going to make tough decisions. This is a moment of heartburn, but I want to be clear that not voting for this tomorrow is not a permanent decision. We can always reconsider it when the time is right and when these tensions have been assuaged. And I do believe that they will be assuaged.
So the showdown is coming to a head today, the big standoff. I'm going to try to give you a video clip later on if I can manage it of what's happening. If not, then tomorrow morning as usual. But yeah, if you appreciate all these updates and how I get straight to the point, not drag things out and hype it up too much like some other channels do, hit the like button down below and subscribe for more videos like this that are straight to the point. Now, when it comes to a stimulus update, $2,000 monthly checks, petition grows closer to milestone number of signatures. Now, when it comes to the $2,000 per month fourth stimulus check, the only action that's happening on right now is that change.org petition, which I mentioned in the videos. No politicians have mentioned it, but when it comes to stimulus check update, Biden administration announces new $600 payment for some Americans. So this is one of the latest articles in terms of stimulus going out. So it's saying that a fourth stimulus payment is coming to certain workers. So this is going, it's going to be a $600 payment to meat packing workers, farm workers, and grocery store workers. The funds will come from a $700 million program authorized to help employees with these industries. It is not clear exactly how the money will be distributed, but the $20 million of the funds is earmarked for workers in grocery stores. So those are the latest stimulus payments that we know of so far. Anyways, that is all the stimulus news I have for you today to hopefully cheer you up a bit